DA leader John Steenhuisen says the party will invoke Section 19 of the Statement of Intent within the Government of National Unity. The move comes as tensions rise between GNU partners after President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the Expropriation Bill into law. Steenhuisen is accusing the ANC of undermining the spirit of negotiation. He was speaking during a briefing on the party's reaction to the latest legislation.
Clause 19 was specifically put in place to deal with situations where disagreements within the coalition arose. Clause 19 codifies the procedure to be followed when differences arise between parties to the Government of National Unity. Clause 19.3 states, and I quote, "Sufficient consensus exists when parties to the GNU representing 60% of seats in the National Assembly agree," unquote. The only parties that represent 60% of the seats in the National Assembly are the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance. In the event of a lack of sufficient consensus, the Statement of Intent in Clause 20 continues, the parties to the GNU shall also establish dispute resolution or deadlock breaking mechanisms in instances where sufficient consensus is not reached.
Steenhuisen says he believes the coalition needs a reset.
Whether the ANC likes it or not, the stability of this government, as well as the security of the President's own position, depends entirely on the relationship between the two largest parties to the Government of National Unity. In keeping with our mature approach to coalition government, the Democratic Alliance is therefore urgently seeking to pursue a reset in this relationship. To do so, I yesterday wrote directly to President Ramaphosa to do the following things: to object in the strongest possible terms to the fact that he simply signed the Expropriation Act this week in contravention of a clear legal opinion and concerns submitted by the Minister of Public Works that the Act is in fact unconstitutional and could quite easily be remedied by sending it back to Parliament.
Now, for more reaction on this, I'm joined by political analyst Musa Mdunge. Musa, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. So first it was the signing of the Bella Bill and now the signing of the Expropriation Bill that seems to have set the cat amongst the pigeons in the GNU holding. The DA leader has said there needs to be a reset of this coalition. What's your take on their stance?
Well, thank you, Katlego, for having me, and good evening to you and to the viewers. Well, certainly this was expected. You know, the Bella Act was perhaps the smokescreen to an even larger sort of conflict that was brewing between these coalition partners. And so, unsurprising to see the Democratic Alliance as well as the Freedom Front Plus take the positions that they have taken as it concerns this matter. And in many ways, Katlego, in just listening even to John Steenhuisen speak there, one wonders and asks themselves, in the arrangement of this GNU, especially the agreement of intent, is who fooled who here? Because when you read the letter of the intent, it is clear for the ANC when they did that, when they signed up to that agreement, they had in mind the thought that perhaps an EFF or another huge party would also join in, which would balance the scales, allowing for this 60% of seats issue to be one that they are not held ransom by. But unfortunately, it is the Democratic Alliance in this case who seems to have the winning hand because the numbers don't lie. And so it was cheeky to an extent to see the ANC pass this legislation, given that you're already in a new government of national unity. And so bound were these parties to conflict. The question now, Katlego, is this the disagreement that breaks the camel's back? And I'm not sure that it is, because to the Democratic Alliance, what this should show them is if the ANC left to its own devices, it will continue to pursue an agenda of the ANC. And so the Democratic Alliance knows more than ever now that it needs to remain within the GNU. So where some are saying this threatens the GNU, I say no. In actual fact, it emboldens the survival of this GNU.
Well, I mean, the ANC-SG came and responded to some of the statements made by the DA leader. And Mr. Mbalula said that, and I'm quoting him, in being able to pass through the contentious legislation, the ANC has not outmaneuvered the DA. It's the DA that outmaneuvered themselves. The DA should have said when they were negotiating the GNU of all the bills that they don't agree to, and should have renegotiated this at the very beginning. Do you agree to this?
I do agree with him on that sense. There should have been an agreement that legislation that was already passed by Parliament but was waiting for the president's assent should have been renegotiated. You know, it would have clearly created moments of conflict and division within the GNU, waste unnecessary time that could be used to turn the attention on the economy. And so certainly it does seem, Katlego, that the DA and the Freedom Fund Plus were bested in terms of these negotiations and clearly didn't envision that the ANC would be so bold as to make and take this approach. But again, remember, Katlego, while these parties are in government together, they don't in any way disregard their individual party identities and interests. And so it is expected that the Democratic Alliance would have a lot to say about the act, and it is expected as well that the ANC would defend it. But none of these things are an indication to me of a GNU, a government that is about to implode.
I mean, parties such as the MK party yesterday came out and said, well, the signing of this expropriation bill is inconsequential. It's really not going to make much of a difference in terms of really what is needed for redress in South Africa. Do you think the DA is possibly just reacting on them not being consulted and not really on the merits of what the bill actually intends to do?
Well, one, it is perhaps that because they have not been consulted before the president signed this law into act, this bill into act, but also let's think about who is the exercising authority in terms of this particular act. It is a DA member himself. The Minister of Public Works is the one who must not only propagate this act, which then puts it into action, but then he is chief in the execution thereof. And so clearly for the Democratic Alliance, this is a catch-22 situation here in which it is the exercising authority, or rather its DA member is, but at the same time it is against this particular act. But remember, the minister now has power, because as long as the minister does not propagate the act, guess what? It can never be implemented. And so this is perhaps, Katlego, the checkmate that the DA presents to the ANC. That means that these two parties must find each other. I think to drag each other to the courts of law is a dangerous thing. And I'll tell you why. Because during the Zuma years, we saw a lot of parties go to the courts. And the problem with that, Katlego, is that it almost broke the separation of power, which is the bedrock of any democracy that has checks and balances. And we must not ever find ourselves back in that place where the court have to play an unweighted role because both the executive and parliament are failing in the execution of their duties.
So we are going to obviously be seeing possibly then the two ministers of the DA expected to execute on these acts, both the Bella and the expropriation. And like you're saying, maybe this is what is going to strengthen and push the GNU even further. Could this open just ways for other parties such as the EFF and the MK to sort of find their way in terms of having some kind of likening with the ANC and find their way within the GNU in the next year or two?
Well, certainly. It will all depend on how the ANC positions itself in terms of this particular tension. If the ANC holds fast, then they are likely to turn to the EFF or MK party or any other party that will assist it in terms of its legislative program going forward. And so, you know, it's clear that the EFF are also looking for a moment in which they can insert themselves. So is the MK party. And in many ways, the ANC in many ways is doomed if you do and doomed if you don't. At this point, either they hold the line or they renegotiate this thing in a way that no side wins. And perhaps, Katlego, maybe, just maybe, that is the success of this act. is that both the extremes don't like it. The Freedom Front Plus to the right and the MK and the EFF to the left. And if that's the case, I guess then perhaps this legislation is good in that sense that there are losers on all ends. And perhaps the question is, who is the winner? Is it the ANC? Can they run this in the way that they want to? Or will they have to track back? Really, time will tell.
And certainly the winner has to be the people of South Africa. Thank you so much for your time, Musa Mdunge, joining us this evening, speaking to us about whether the expropriation bill that has been signed as an act into law by the president is going to break the GNU in any way.